In recent years, there has been much talk about the lost villages of Dorset. Random videos from days of old, newspaper articles, you name it. Now, there's said to be up to 100 lost villages in Dorset, and they all are said to have one thing in common. The blue outline on this map gives a rough indication of the county of Dorset. Now, if I plot the table of locations that I've researched, which shows all the lost villages I can find, well, it doesn't look very exciting. But what if I change the underlying map from Google Maps to this map? So this is Wholeness Church, and it's difficult to date because it's got some different features from many different eras, but namely one of which is some graffiti just there from the 1600s, and probably a lot more as well. If we come inside, there's all sorts again from different eras. There's a medieval barrel roof. Now, some of the archways are from the more recent Hamwood quarry. I think the stone there must have been easy to manipulate and make some of the more decorative features. This is a truly stunning church. But we're not going to be talking about that today as such. We're not talking about religion. What we want to talk about today is something that isn't here. Let's just pan around and have a look outside, and what can you see? Well, what can't you see? What exactly did this church serve? There's no houses that way, nothing that way, nothing that way, and nothing behind the church. There's literally nothing here, for as far as I can see, in every direction. Further to the south, just up ahead of me, it's quite a walk, but I assure you it's one that you will want to make when you see what's just in front of the camera now. Limscombe. It's recorded as far back as the Saxon period, and then presumably on into the Domesday Book in the medieval period thereafter. So the stream runs down through this valley. Looks like it collects from up on Limscombe bottom there, the huge basin that it is. And just ahead of me here is what looks like it could have been like an old mill or something, but I'm guessing actually it was more like a pool to collect water for maybe like a sheep wash or something like that, cattle wash of some kind. But what we really want to show you today is what's just there in the background of this shot. Up on the hill, just to the northeast of the basin there, is an old settlement marked on the OS maps. I'd love to think that it had something to do with these old remains. Just ahead of me here, the chapel just there, and of course the old building, the house or whatever it was, just here. It's a really fascinating landscape. Now, in the 12th century, I believe this had a number of dwellings in the area. It was recorded what the people do and how many there were, and I guess that was for taxation, a bit like the Domesday Book. But this is quite something else. A big hearth behind me, another one through there, another fireplace up there indicates there would have been another floor at least. So maybe, perhaps a manor house, but certainly a significant barn right next to the chapel just there. I know I said you should really come to this area, bit of a trek, but honestly I can't recommend it enough. Let's see if the chapel is open and we can have a look inside. It is. Wow, recently renovated, and you can tell that not least by the thatched roof. Look at this, some of the obviously much newer beams, and then look, we've got some really old features. This beam here, I've no idea what that is up there, and a mix of features like some of the other churches we've seen or chapels we've seen today. It's got a mix of different eras, and again, this is not my area of expertise by any means, but you can certainly tell that there's a lot going on here, different eras. It's really difficult to imagine that this old chapel, very old chapel, and the abandoned cottage or house that's just here right beside it would have been the only things in this landscape, especially if you consider the old settlement up on the hill at the top of the valley there. Now perhaps that would have been quite an era earlier, but I'd love to imagine that somehow they did link over time and this became the place of worship. But again, the point being, you would very much imagine a number of other buildings around in this community for that chapel to serve at the time. If you dig around the beautiful county of Dorset, it doesn't take much research to find more of these long forgotten villages. This is Knowlton, and the abandoned church here sits inside one of 3 henges in the local area. The church itself is said to have some extremely old features. Now if we look up just to the top of the archway up there, that archway is supposedly Anglo-Saxon, and just behind me over here, the archway there is supposed to be Norman. Now, I'm no expert on that by any means, but at least it gives us some context to how old this church is and how important it was, again, sat on top of this landscape on this hill. It's also said to be on some ancient trackways. Well, that kind of makes sense because, again, we're on top of the chalk and we're heading that way towards Salisbury and Stonehenge. So this church, the Knowlton Church, the Christians plonked it in the middle of the henge. Where exactly did it serve? What village did it serve? Because there's nothing around the close vicinity. What exactly was it for? So let's head down the road just there to the River Allen. Not sure how well it comes out on camera, but the bank just back there, you can see that runs all the way along here, is quite important in relation to Knowlton, the church, and obviously the whole of the landscape around here. So where is the abandoned village? Well, just ahead of me is the River Allen, and it's said that all this land here was flattened over many decades, centuries probably, and was used for farming. That's why it doesn't really follow the contour of the land. It should slowly slope upwards to the top of the ditch there you see in the distance. So just the other side of the river, just over there, there were a number of holloways, there were boundaries, enclosures, and some markings that looked like they resembled what would have been old houses. But again, nothing here to speak of today apart from one house and a farm building just ahead of me. So where is all this going? What do these villages long forgotten have in common? Well, let's go back to that map, and specifically the overlay. Because the map is a geological one and the central belt is predominantly chalk. Now to the southern end of the map is West Ringstead, and just to the west of this car park there is a field containing enclosures, holloways, all kinds of earthworks. Now at the top of this field is Glebe Cottage. It was once a church that served the local community here, which now doesn't exist. But unlike the others, this community isn't on chalkland. But what it does give us is perhaps the most important view of today's story. The view from West Ringstead, well, it takes us across the bay here around about 3 miles southwest. And it's time to consider the most important date here when we try and understand what happened to all these villages on the chalk. The 25th of June 1348, and the port of Malcolm, now Weymouth, 2 ships sailed in, one of which was carrying the plague, which had been working its way across Europe for the last year or so. It was only a matter of time before it started infecting the population and working its way northwards up across the chalk. Dorchester and its surrounding villages and small populations would have probably been one of the first places that the plague hit on that fateful day in 1348. And it's said that The plague could have halved the population of the UK, and when you consider that so much of that was already on the chalk uplands of the south in Dorset, well, in front of me now is perhaps a great example of one of these early villages that is no more. The lost village of Holworth. Here we are in this field which has got earthworks aplenty. Holworth was mentioned in 933 AD, it was mentioned in the Domesday Book, and on each occasion it had a small population, a modest population, but a dig in 1936 found all sorts of old pottery here, 12th century and up to the 15th century. Rubbled houses, rubbled floor on some houses and old properties here. And yeah, looking ahead of me now, you can see a sea of earthworks and boundaries, all kinds of things going on here. Now, the archaeological evidence that was found here dated the abandonment of this village as early as around about the 1600s. So many of the ancient routeways came inland from the south up onto the chalk here, the high and dry route inland. So it's no surprise that many settlements, ancient settlements, grew up here along those routes, and there's countless evidence of that all around us. To the northwest you had the more densely forested area. To the southeast of here you had more acidic soil, that of sort of the New Forest area. So it really made these chalklands the best place for routeways, and of course thereafter settlement and sort of early Neolithic farming, I guess. All around us here is the ancient settlement of Gussage, and there's earthworks everywhere. It probably highlights really here the importance of all of this area. Gussage, the settlement, sits pretty much in the middle of the Cursis, which is said to be a 5,000-year-old parallel ditches, and it really shows that they have been using this whole landscape for numerous reasons for millennia. Perhaps those people had indeed been travelling up from Weymouth or the Malcolm Regis Port for millennia and making their mark on this landscape ever since, all the way up through here, and leaving random amazing earthworks and mysteries for us to try and solve today. So how does that theory sit with you? It certainly fell into my net of obsessions, and I spent the last few weeks doing a spreadsheet of all these abandoned villages in Dorset and then plotting them on the map. So I spent ages researching that idea and researched into all the different villages that had become abandoned and read their story, and the idea being that as the population thinned out, the people, the villagers, all went to the lower lands where the Anglo-Saxons had traditionally been, and the forests were cleared and the land became much more workable. Now that meant that the higher villages of the chalk became abandoned in the truest sense. I love that idea, I love the romance behind it, but then you start digging into some of the actual individual stories of the villages themselves, and it doesn't quite add up. So this is Hazelbury Bryan, and I'm just going to scout to the left of the church to get myself away from the local leaf blowing society. So Hazelbury Bryan serves a few of the villages around here, but none of the villages are that close. They're all at least sort of a kilometre away in a circle. This remains in Droop, the small hamlet of Droop, and it only has a manor house and maybe one other house. So why would that be? So Droop here, where the church remains and the manor house remained, was said to be the original location of the village, until of course the Black Death, and then it was seemingly hit in two separate waves, and that obviously shook people to the core, that they reputedly burned down their village and they moved their settlements to slightly higher ground all around here. Now if you have a look on an old OS map or a current OS map, you can see that the villages that are now in place that this church serves, the parishes, well, they're actually almost in a circle around this church, but quite a distance from it. So back here at Wholeness, well, this is a classic Dorset abandoned village. There's nothing in sight, maybe a small farm community at the top of the hill there, but quite like the others, maybe there's one thing we're missing here, the fact that this isn't on chalk, it's on that northern ridge where maybe more of the forestry was. So, I don't know, maybe it's more like Hazelbury Bryan, where they upped sticks and they left the community and they burnt the village down. Nope, not at all, because this village was abandoned in the 1600s. So maybe we're completely barking up the wrong tree. Maybe we need to look at this like evolution rather than just a snapshot in time. Maybe this needs to be looked at over decades and perhaps centuries. I love this place. I love this old Knowlton church. And who knows what was here before? Who knows if there was a henge here, as in a stone henge in its traditional sense that we know it, because a lot of these blocks could well have been from those sort of days, from that period, so they may well have recarved them into the church, perhaps. Who knows? Now, when we first made this video, we had every intention of coming to the same conclusion as Jack Hargreaves and more recent reports, which suggested all these abandoned villages up on the chalk here were there because of the Black Plague, and it thinned out the population and they had to move down into the more fertile soil. But it really shows that actually when you do dig into some of the individual cases around here, you can use more modern research, you learn that actually there's always a story behind each and every village, and it doesn't always quite add up to that theory. Now, I'm sure that theory does ring true in a lot of cases. I'm not here, we don't want to be the people that sort of challenge every accepted theory, every accepted notion, but yeah, I think that social change happens over decades and decades, and there's always something else to consider. But yeah, the Black Plague is certainly high up there on the agenda. So I've been Paul and I've been moseying around Dorset. Really appreciate your time for watching this video. If you liked it and you like this sort of thing, which is just me, sometimes Rebecca, wandering around the countryside, then click on that subscribe button, and yeah, we'll see you next week.